front of 18 people, most of whom I'd only known for a few months, and I was unbuckling my belt. Now, clearly this is a situation in which I never expected to find myself, and so to understand how I got there, let's go back a few months earlier, and it was February of 1997, and I had just begun my career as a satellite imagery analyst for the federal government. For those of you who don't know what a satellite imagery analyst does, these are officers who monitor activity in foreign countries, looking for nefarious behavior so that they can alert policymakers and military officials. So, for example, with the Cuban Missile Crisis, they were satellite imagery analysts who identified the presence of Soviet missiles on Cuba. And so as part of this, there's a relatively grueling 6-month course where you learn a variety of things. You're learning how to identify different types of equipment at different types of facilities. You're learning how to manipulate imagery. And the class is comprised of people from all walks of life, and so you sort of bond. And as part of this class, you visit you visit and different facilities, you go look at equipment, so you can understand what it looks like from the ground perspective. So that makes more sense when you're looking at it from a bird's eye perspective. So on the particular day in question, we were going to an industrial facility. So we arrive at the industrial facility. They give us hard hats, which I thought we were going to get to keep them, but we didn't. And so we put on the hard hats. We get in one of these industrial elevators, which was, and it's roughly the size of this stage. So, decent size, but so the elevator doors close, it starts moving, and after some period of time, I don't even remember now, it stops. And so if you can imagine yourself in a situation like that, for the first few moments, you're sort of wondering, well, I guess at some point somebody in some control room is going to look around and notice that this elevator is stopped, and they're going to come to our rescue. That didn't happen. And so after maybe 15 minutes or so, someone says to the tour guide, so there are now 19 of us in there, 17 students, one instructor, and one tour guide. And someone says to the tour guide, who all knows that we're here? And he said, me. I set up the tours, I take people on the tours, and I'm the only one who knows you're here. And so we're like, okay. And then we said, well, if we made a lot of noise, who would hear us? And he said, this is a highly automated facility. We have like 5 people who are working here, and it's really noisy, so they're all wearing headphones. He's like, no one's going to hear you. Okay, good. And so a number of us try to open the doors, because obviously, okay, let's just start basic. And we try to open the doors, and nothing happened. And then some genius in the front of the elevator car decides to push every single button. And that didn't do anything. Okay, so we've tried pushing all the buttons. The next step is there's an alarm button. And so someone pushes the alarm. There is no alarm. And now let me just remind you, this is February of 1997. It had only been a few months prior that I got my first cell phone. It was a monstrosity. You almost had to hold it with 2 hands. It was not smart. You couldn't text with it. You couldn't go on the internet with it. And oh, by the way, because we work in a classified facility, we weren't allowed to have cell phones with us in the first place. So no one had a cell phone. So we're stuck in this elevator, and so the last sort of beacon of hope is the phone, the receiver that is hardwired into the elevator. Okay, so someone opens the panel and takes out the receiver, and you see me doing like this. People of a certain age are going to understand exactly what I'm talking about. Back in the day, the receiver went like this. There was the rotary dial, right? And so someone takes out the receiver and listens, and there is no sound. Okay, so then they unscrew the end, and again, people of a certain age know what I'm talking about. You unscrew the receiver, and we looked in there, and there were no guts inside the receiver. So it's essentially a Fisher-Price toy, right? Okay, and then the genius starts to lose his shit, and he starts donkey kicking the doors as if that's somehow going to make them magically open. It doesn't. And after doing that for several moments, one of the guys in the elevator car says, if you don't stop doing that, I'm going to knock you out because you're wasting my oxygen. So the guy stops, Meanwhile, in the corner of the elevator car, there's a woman who's beginning to hyperventilate. And so people are gathered around her. And if you didn't think you had to go to the bathroom before, you certainly felt like you had to go now, right? And we were on top of each other again. 19 people. 19 people. So we're on top of each other. People are starting to stink because we're now between the 30-minute and the 1-hour time frame, right? And so we start to look around a little bit more, reinforced steel walls. The ceiling panels are impact bolted in. So the bolts are in place with a machine. They're recessed into the ceiling panels. And so there was one person in the elevator car who was tall enough that he could reach with relative ease the nuts on these bolts. About 6'3", 6'4", quiet, unassuming, Coke bottle glasses, crew cut. He's working on the nuts, and he's not really making much progress. And so we're starting to get a little more nervous, right? Because, this was a class that we were in. At work, they may not know, they're not expecting us to come back at a certain time, and so it's not until sometime later in the evening. Our bus driver's taking a nap, so he has no idea when we're going to come back out. And so he rests. And then the guy next to him says, you know what? I have a Swiss Army knife, and it has the little wrench attachment. So he starts working on it again with the Swiss Army knife. And he's making a little more progress, but it's still tough going. And he's working above his head, right? And so when your arms is suspended above you and you're actually doing something, it starts to get very exhausting. And so he takes a break. Anytime one of us is faced with a seemingly impossible situation, you have to draw upon some sort of inner reserve. And in some cases, what you're doing is you're thinking about a loved one, or you're thinking about a similar situation in which you faced a seemingly impossible task, and how did you overcome this? And sometimes you're just thinking about a particular muse, right? So for this quiet, unassuming guy, he found his muse. And so he takes the Swiss Army knife, and he goes back up to the nut, and he says over and over again, "Come on, bitch! Come on, bitch! Come on, bitch!" And so everybody is staring at him. I have no idea what it's like to have a bunch of strangers staring at you, but I'm sure it must have been disconcerting. And so he's doing this over and over again, and people are trying to, support him and encourage him, right? And finally, he starts to make progress. And he only needs to get 3 of them off, and then we can slide the panel off to the side. And so he manages to get three of them off. They slide the panel off to the side, and there is this chasm of darkness. A little bit of cool air, so that was nice. There's coal dust that starts to filter down into the elevator car. And so now we've got this panel off. So what do we do now? Well, 2 of the people in the elevator car decide what needs to happen next is they need to be on top of the elevator car. And one of those individuals is actually here tonight if he decides he wants to make his presence known. But so anyway, these 2 individuals get on top of the elevator car. It's metal, there's coal dust, it's slippery, and oh, by the way, we don't have smartphones. So you know what else we don't have? A flashlight app. And so it's, relative darkness. There's a little bit of light inside the elevator car, but so they're on top of it. Meanwhile, the instructor is just thinking, I'm going to get escorted out of work because I'm going to kill 2 of my students. And so they're on top of the elevator car, and we've already established this elevator is not functioning very well, right? But a bunch of buttons have been pushed. Like, we don't know if the elevator car is just going to start rocketing up. They're going to get squished against the top. Is it going to go into a free fall? And because they don't have a flashlight, they don't know where the edges are, so they disappear from view. And we hear the footsteps, and then nothing, and then we hear more footsteps, and they look back in, and they said, "We didn't go very far. We went like a couple of feet. We can see the external doors, we can see the landing, and we also know why we can't open the elevator doors, because there's a lever that's in front of the doors. And we think if we could lift the lever, we can open the doors." And of course, at this point, I mean, we're willing to take anything because we're like 2 hours in. Again, 19 people. It's very, very tight. And so they said, but we have an idea. If you give us your belts, we can attach the belts together and lower it over the edge and lift the lever, and we think you can open the doors. So there in front of 18 people, most of whom I've only known for a few months, I began to unbuckle my belt along with many of my classmates. So we give them the belts, they attach them, they pull the lever, we pull at the doors, and they open. And such a feeling of relief, right? Because we now know we're not going to be stuck in here all night long. And so, one by one, we began to exit the elevator, go down the 2 feet or so to the landing, and we're all out. And there, like 15 feet away, is a guy looking at us incredulously with headphones, wondering how all these people have gotten out. And then the tour guide says, I've got another elevator over here. We can take that one. We're like, no, we're good. And so, as I've thought back on this experience over the years, I've thought of a few things, and one is, don't go anywhere without a Swiss Army knife. Number two is, if you find yourself in a situation like that and you're part of a group, everyone has something they can do to contribute. For some people, you're the clever one. For some, you're the courageous one. For some, you're just the peacemaker. And some people just supply the belts. And the third thing is, Sir Isaac Newton is full of shit. What goes up does not necessarily come back down. Thank you.